Do you ever find yourself in post-production thinking, why the hell do I have so much noise in my footage? Well, this video is for you because like this footage right here, it's not filmed correctly, and I've got a few steps for you guys to really try and up your game when it comes to reducing that noise, just like this. So be sure to stick around because I've got so many really important tips for you guys to really help reduce that noise when it comes to filming, get clean footage, make a whole bunch of money, or just create some incredible art. So let's get into it. What's going on, my friends? I hope you're all doing absolutely fantastic, and if you are new to my channel, please consider subscribing and give this video a like. That would be absolutely amazing. But we're going to be talking about noise reduction and how to actually mitigate that noise when you're actually filming. There are a few different things that you're going to want to do right from the start. Now, a lot of people, when they get noise in post-production, it's generally from underexposing. So this is the first one, is that you're not actually filming the scene correctly. You're pretty much filming it with your multimetering and it says pretty much 0, or it's -1 or -2 and it's flashing. That's not a good thing. If you are filming an S-Log3, you do have to try and overexpose, generally by 1.7 or 2 stops overexposed. Now, when it comes to overexposure, what I like to do is expose almost as high as possible without clipping the highlights so I can bring up the shadows, and then in post-production is I lower all my levels right down. It's all about contrast ratios on what your subject is and what your background is as well. There are so many different ways to expose, which I'm going to make a video, but it's very complex on how to properly expose for whatever scene you're trying to shoot. But the biggest key factor is you don't want to underexpose, because in post-production, you're probably going to have to bring it up, and it's going to bring up all that noise, which is not a good thing. So one of the biggest things of not underexposing is bringing in artificial lighting. So trying to bring in as much light as possible, obviously without harsh shadows and without blowing out any sort of details. This is a key thing when it comes to that exposure level. And a little thing to do with underexposures, what a lot of people do if the scene isn't bright enough, they'll generally utilize the ISO, and that's going to bring up noise, because the more you crank up that ISO, the more the noise is going to be prevalent. It's going to show up a lot more in your editing software. So you want to try and stay as close to your base ISO as possible. A7 S3 was 640 and 12,800, whereas generally all other cameras in S-Log is generally around that 800 ISO. So you want to stay as close to your base ISO as possible, because that is the best signal to noise ratio when it comes to noise, and then obviously your dynamic range as well. And also ongoing with that is if you have a lens that can open up to a wider aperture, that's going to help bring in more light. So an f1.4 lens, f1.8, whatever those kind of lenses are, that can definitely help. And if you are shooting with an f4 lens, obviously you're not letting in as much light as an f2.8, f2, f1.8, or f1.4, anything wider than that f4. So trying that out as well is going to help you to really level out that noise. Now, ongoing with that when it comes to underexposure is color grading. Some people are actually color grading their footage incorrectly. They're trying to bring up the shadows, which essentially is going to bring up all the noise levels, and that's not what you want to do. You don't really want to touch the shadows pretty much at all. You want to try and drop the shadows, if anything, and drop all the levels down to try and, really reduce the amount of noise that's in the image. And if you are underexposing, some people will try and boost that exposure. So that exposure slider should really never change unless you're trying to bring it down. But if you are bringing it down, you generally use the curves, or you bring the whites and the blacks down, or the shadows as well. Now, another thing when it comes to in your editing software, I use Neat Video. So that is a noise suppression software that I actually use, and you do have to pay for it. I can't remember how much it was, maybe 120 bucks or 130 bucks. This is an extremely amazing software. Now, DaVinci Resolve has its own noise reduction software in the actual software itself. If you do have the paid version, this is phenomenal. It works incredibly well, but I'm a Premiere Pro user, so I use Neat Video, and this has saved my butt plenty of times, especially if I am shooting in low light situations and I did mess up the exposure, or I had zero control over the scene and I did have to use a higher ISO level and introduce that noise. That's where I just use Neat Video. Now, the last one is actually filming in 4K. Now you're thinking, how does filming in 4K make my noise better? Well, a lot of the Sony cameras, especially the a7 IV, a7R5, the FX30, are higher resolution sensors. So let's say the a7 IV is a 7K sensor that downsamples the image into a 4K footage. Now this is going to compress the size of the noise a lot smaller, making it look like that the noise performance, the signal to noise performance ratio is actually better. That is very similar to the FX30 and the a7R5 as well. So filming in 4K is going to compress that noise, making it look smaller and obviously not as noticeable. And when you are filming in 1080p, essentially you're just getting the full size of the image. It's not downsampling at all, unless it is a camera that does downsample the 4K into the 1080, and then obviously you do have a similar story there with smaller noise performance. Now ultimately, if you know you have a 1080p export and this is what the client wants, or this is what you want for YouTube, film in 4K if you can, if you have the storage space, if you have the capabilities of filming in 4K, try film in 4K and then just scale it down into that 1080p timeline. The noise just won't appear as large because you're squeezing it a lot smaller. So that can actually make the noise appear obviously a lot less, and that's how you get rid of some of the noise. So what are the takeaways here from this video? Well, essentially, film in 4K if you can. That's probably the best, especially if you do have a downsampled sensor. You're gonna get nice, clean image. Also, make sure you don't underexpose. If anything, if you are filming in S-Log3, you wanna try and overexpose and trying to bring up the shadows, then bring it down in post so you don't have as much noise. But obviously, keep in consideration of your highlights as well. Potentially invest in Neat Video, which is a great software. I'm not sponsored by them. I've just been using them for a few years now, and I've had absolutely no issues with it. And pretty much that one outright cost has saved me hundreds and potentially thousands of dollars in some shots that were pretty much unusable, and unfortunately, I just couldn't bring it back normally. Now, potentially invest in some lights, because if you do want to try and not underexpose, you may actually have to bring in artificial lighting, and lighting is extremely important in any situation. Also, potentially get some faster lenses so you can shoot more in low light situations and obviously gather more light into the sensor because you have an f1.4 and f1.8 lens, just anything that has a larger aperture. And lastly, try not to boost up the shadows too much in post-production, because with any camera at any ISO level, there is still going to be somewhat a little bit of noise, regardless of the internal noise reduction that your camera has. So try and do some different color grading techniques where you're not bringing up those shadows. So anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. That would be absolutely amazing. And I really hope you found this video useful. There's going to be a whole bunch more tutorials coming with the a7 IV, FX30 and all those kind of Sony cameras. I'm sure there's going to be a whole bunch of new cameras coming out this year, which I'll get my hands on and do those reviews. But be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, let's get it.